if you've been around Five Points Church since our existence about 1.5 years ago, then you will have gotten pretty familiar with our 5 core values. These are values that we hold near and dear to our heart. And, some of these seem maybe a bit more like self-explanatory. And then as we went through these values, maybe you could get down here to hospitality and you might go, okay, I think I know what they mean when they say hospitality, but maybe I don't either. In fact, a few weeks ago, I asked people, hey, can you define hospitality? And there were like a lot of close threads to what was said, but ultimately there was kind of no shared definition. So last week, I started a series, and I said, look, I want us to be able to define hospitality. I want us to be able to say, like, when we say hospitality is our fabric, that we're like, okay, we get that. We know what that means. And so I defined it last week because I think that's kind of problem number one I wanted to solve. If we're going to say hospitality is so important to us, let's actually kind of agree on what hospitality, biblical hospitality, actually is. And I have that definition for you. I want to say it out loud again. This is from last week. I'll try not to recap my entire message. I think I have that slide there. But biblical hospitality is when we make room in our lives for strangers and believers, when we make room for them and bring them in just in the way that Jesus did. That's what hospitality is. We looked at Romans chapter 15 last week, and we looked at that one verse that said, welcome others just as Jesus has welcomed us. It's pretty clear if we look at the example of Jesus, what welcoming others should look like. And we're just going to keep going down that lane. We're going to keep right on central in that idea of what it really looks like to welcome others the way in which Jesus has welcomed us. All right, so that's our goal today, is to first, we've got a definition for hospitality, but second, here's the thing. Here's the real problem we run into when we talk about hospitality. Not just defining it, not just knowing what it is, but actually practicing it. If you're going to, on a scale of 1 to 10, rate yourself on hospitality, okay? Do I welcome others? Think about this again with me. Do I welcome others, making room for them with my life, with my house, with what God's entrusted to me? Do I make room for them in the same way that Jesus has made room for me? How am I doing? If on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is like Oscar the Grouch, I live in my trash can and I don't want anyone else in my world. And 10 is true biblical hospitality. Where do we put ourselves on that scale? 1 to 10. I'm maybe, okay, I feel pretty good. Maybe I'm a 5. Some of you are a 2, a 3, a 4, maybe so. There's several people gave me feedback last week. They were like, hey, appreciated your message. And listen, when you talked about this, I thought of blank. And you brought up people in your life that have truly walked this out, right? And you brought up situations where you've seen people truly walk this out. Kyle and Carly, who just now started to be a part of our church, they told me about a story that happened to them in Central Asia when they lived there just a short time ago. Well, actually, this particular incident was a few years ago. And here's what they shared with me. They said, a few years ago, a severe earthquake struck the country we were working in, killing as many as 100,000 people overnight. It was devastating. Kyle and I went to help with relief work, delivering supplies and food to families who had lost everything and were now living in tents. One day, we brought a family the supplies they had requested. As soon as we had arrived, they invited us into their tent. And they asked, can we make you coffee? Can we get you something to eat? And then, incredibly, they took some of the very food that we had just delivered and dropped off with them, prepared it, and served it to us alongside some coffee and tea. Here they were with almost nothing, yet their first thought was to share what they had been given. They welcomed us into what was likely the most humble living space they'd ever known, without hesitation or shame, because showing hospitality was that important to them. That's a powerful testimony of hospitality. And when I hear a story like that, and when I heard others share stories of like where they've experienced it, I'm like, I think as believers, if you're a Christian, I know not everybody in here may claim to be a Christian, but for all of us who claim to be Christians, doesn't that sound like what our life should look like? To find ourselves maybe in terrible circumstances and still be thinking of the other. Now, if you're like, okay, I want to know more about what the Bible talks about and says actually about hospitality. Is it in there? I want to give you just a few key verses in the Bible that explicitly talk about hospitality to just kind of frame our continued talks on this subject. So first, Leviticus 19:33 through 34 says, when a stranger sojourns with you in your land, so this is God speaking to his people Israel, and he's giving them directive. All right? This is after Egypt, after they've been enslaved, and he says, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You knew how it felt, and now when there are sojourners who come among you, you welcome them. All right, next we'll go to Romans 12:13. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. In God's church, hospitality must be a part of how we operate. Romans 15:7, this was the verse we talked about last week. Therefore, welcome. We talked about the idea of welcome, that word meaning like embrace, accept, bring in. Welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God. Hebrews 13:2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. I told you my story last week. I don't have another one this week, but that was my story I told you last week about how we can be a part of the supernatural when we show hospitality. We can, and even greater than that, we can meet Jesus. I read from Matthew 25 last week. We can meet Jesus when we practice hospitality. That was the whole point of that. Okay, next, I think I have one more. 1 Peter 4:9. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. So those are explicit verses in the Bible, and my theory is the Bible is written in such a hospitable culture that there probably would be more verses in the Bible. God would have made sure that there was more if we lived in this culture writing the Bible right now, or more commands would have had to been given to us because of how foreign this can seem, what we're reading about with hospitality, what we're thinking about of what it actually means to do hospitality. That's just my theory, though. All right, so here's the problem. Again, we know, I hope you can see it. I hope you can feel it. Like, we should be practicing hospitality. And some of you, like, you're reading these verses, I'm thinking, there's some guys in here, you're living in a dorm right now, and there's like, yeah, my dorm is not a place of hospitality. My room is not a place of hospitality. Yes, it can be, and your life can be. Whatever objection you may have, my life is, we're gonna get there. We're gonna talk about why we don't practice hospitality. I'm gonna give you 7 reasons why we don't practice hospitality. I'm gonna talk about this idea that it's hard for us in the culture we're living in to practice hospitality, okay? I'll give you an illustration to just make you feel it a little bit, okay? I hope it does anyways. I don't like going to Walmart. I don't know if anyone shares that with me, but I really don't like going there when it's crowded and the whole thing probably, like, I'm sure the last few weeks have been at Walmart. And so I'm a little scarred from several attempts of going to Walmart, but one in particular I just remember very vividly, okay? And I was making a run to Walmart just because we needed toilet paper, all right? And this wasn't during COVID. This was just another time. And I needed to get toilet paper for our house. So I go, and I don't want to talk about the 30 minutes I spent trying to find it in the store because it was like hidden and like, I don't know, changed where Walmart, it was different. They would like change where it was. I finally found it, got it, and on my way out, I'm like, let me grab some bananas too. So I have toilet paper and bananas, and I get to the checkout line. All right, and there's, this is before they changed it even more recently, where there's like 37 checkout lanes, and there's 2 cashiers. And it makes no sense to go to any of those because, and so I go over to the self-checkout line. This will take me a second because my number one goal when I do things like this is just to get in and out as quickly as possible. Anybody with me, okay? And so I've got my toilet paper and I've got my bananas and I'm standing in the self-checkout line queue. And as I'm there, I'm just watching it all unfold in front of me, just all the fun you find at Walmart. And so every station is taken. And I'm looking at every station. There was 4 of them in the line I was in. And there's a person here who's like a mom and a daughter, and they've got a long ways to go. Okay, so that one's not going to open up anytime soon. I'm like judging, which one should I go to? Then the next one is like an older couple, and they're playing like musical credit cards, and they're like just like swiping cards, and none of them seem to be working. And so I'm like, that's going to be a minute, okay? And then there's another one where they have like, I don't know if the line's ever had a limit, but they had like a cart that was like mountain high, and it was like they're going to be here a long time. And then somebody else just pulled up. And then in front of me, this is what got me. There's a family in front of me, and the only thing they had in their cart, there's a family of 5, the only thing they had in their cart was sugar. And it wasn't just like a bag of sugar like that. It was one that fit only on the bottom of their cart. I didn't even know Walmart had sugar that big. I was just kind of like, where did they get this from? Did they find that somewhere back there? Was it near the toilet paper? And so I'm like, just sorting all this out. And it just seems like it's taking forever. And then I get like a break. The cashier person who's working one of the, I guess just like overseeing all of it, she calls me up to her station. I'm like, yes, I'm getting out of here. She calls me up and she starts scanning my toilet paper and bananas. And as she does, her computer just breaks. It breaks. Like it just shuts down. It just stops. She's like, I've never seen this before. And I was like, yeah, I know. This is what happens to me. And she's like, I don't know. And she's like, you may want to get back in line. As I turn and peel back to go back in line, with my only goal in life being just to get out of there, all 4 stations vacate at the same time. It was like they were doing, like somebody's playing a joke on me right now. They all vacate at the same time, and there were 4 people in line, and they all fill at the same time. And I was literally right back where I started, holding my toilet paper and my bananas, waiting in line after all that. All right, so I give that illustration, not just because to get my frustrations out, and this is not like group counseling by any means, I promise. But to say, it's a bit, I feel like it can be similar when we're going up against a culture that is what I would call anti-hospitality in many ways, in this culture we're living here right now, right here in the U.S., and it can feel a bit like that, like every time we take a step forward, it's like a roadblock, and it like we get nowhere. If you've ever been in a fast-flowing river before, I have a couple times. One time I tried to swim against a really strong current. When I tried to swim across that strong current, I realized that I had no chance. I was swimming as hard as I could, and I was just creeping backwards. And that's a little bit what it felt like in my Walmart experience, and I think a little bit of what it feels like for us if we're going to try to walk out hospitality, what it's going to feel like for us, because I think there's a lot of currents, I think there's a lot of pull that's going to keep us from practicing hospitality like we should. If the Bible commands us to practice hospitality, if it's to be a part of our life, what I'm telling you is I think we live in a culture where it's difficult. And it's hard. And I started making out a list, and I was like, okay, here's reasons I think that like this is keeping us from being out there and living our lives in such a hospitable way. I started writing a list, and after 7, I was like, I better stop, because I felt like I probably could have kept going. But I'm going to give you 7 anti-hospitality pulls, cultural pulls we feel right now in the day we're living in, and why this is hard for us to practice, okay? Hospitality. First, we live in a fragmented society, right? We live in a society where there's all these groups that we get put in. The first thing out of our mouths when we meet people is, we try to find out what group they fit in, basically. And what group they fit in may affect how we relate or don't relate to those people. We're divided by politics. We're divided by class, our race, our lifestyle. We live in a fragmented world. If I were to ask many of you, That especially those of you who've been in this room many, many times, if I were to say to you, on a Sunday, when you walk in the door, who are you looking for? Well, that's pretty obvious. I go look for my friends, right? Isn't that our answer? And that's not all bad to think like that. But what hospitality is going to gear us and make us look for is not necessarily always our friends, but for anyone we might not know. So we live in a fragmented society. We live in an individualistic society. We live in an individualistic culture, right? We think about what goals we can accomplish, where our comfort is, what we want to do. When I say we, I mean what I want to do. Right now, I wonder how many goals you'd have in your life that would actually even have to do with anyone besides yourself. Even saying that out loud is kind of funny. The goals, that's right. That's very American, very us right now. Number 3, we're passive. Our culture has shifted more and more to one that really idolizes relaxation. Like we're thinking, all I want to do right now, after a long, hard day, I'm going to go binge some Netflix. I'm going to go endlessly scroll on my phone. I'm going to lounge for the next 48 hours and nobody bother me. And we've gotten to a place in our culture where like it's so accepted and it's so like okay that as Christians, I think we start to feel that pull. We start to move that direction too, that like we're like, this is good. This is a good thing. And it keeps us from at times maybe getting a little uncomfortable, at times maybe moving out of not just being passive, but like moving out towards people, even when it's awkward or inconvenient. Number 4, I think you'll feel this pull too, that there's a conditionality when it comes to us being a part of people's lives. We think about what they offer us. And if that offer is meaningful to us, then we move forward in the relationship. If we can get nothing in return, it's very rare for anyone in our culture to like keep moving towards that relationship. Number 5, we live in a distracted culture. Constant streams of entertainment that compete for our attention. Literally, there's an endless list of movies, TV shows, arguments to catch up on social media, videos to scroll, podcasts to catch up on, games, activities, events. We can be so distracted. We can be pulled in every direction. Number 6, another cultural pull we have and reason why it's hard to practice hospitality is because we're so busy. We ask each other, how was your week? What was your week like? Or what's your week coming up? And you're just like, I'm so busy. I don't hear it too much in this church, but I think it's a pretty common refrain that we are so often in such constant motion that we have little margin to help and move again towards hospitality. And number 7, I think this cultural pull is very real, that we're so results driven. When I mentioned goals earlier, that's why I was kind of laughing. I was thinking about getting to this one. That we're so results driven. We're thinking about the bottom line and what this does for us and what we get out of it and how it benefits. That again, if we don't see a benefit in the relationship, it's rare for us to move forward towards that relationship. So that's the list. Again, some of those were pulled from some books I read, and some I just thought, yeah, I see this. And I think if you look at those 7, I would hope that it would resonate a little bit, like I'm not just making this up, is what I'm saying. I hope you would go, yeah, I think that's true. I think that I can feel that. And you look at that list and you think that's pretty massive, actually. I can. That's so much pull at times that it can be like when I'm swimming against the current. It can be like the endless trip to Walmart. Like, how am I ever going to get there and get out? And yet there's this goal, like what if we could look like Kyle and Carly's friends that they met in a tent who hosted them in the midst of an earthquake. So, Luke chapter 10. And actually, in Luke chapter 9, Jesus tells us, Luke 9:23, if anyone desires to come after me, let him take up his cross and follow me. And so if we look at that list, the bottom line is we're called to die. We're called to swim against the current. We're called to move against even when it's hard. In Luke chapter 10, we have the story from Jesus that I think just fits right into what we need to talk about today. Jesus is asked a question by one of the Jewish lawyers, and he says, "Teacher, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus answers back, "Well, you know the law. What's it say?" And he says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said, "Okay, great, you got it right. Do that, and you will live." But then the man comes back to Jesus, and Luke adds in, he was trying to justify himself. He asked the question, "Well, then who is my neighbor?" And let's pick it up in verse 30. Jesus tells this story to explain who his neighbor is. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers. They stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to where he was, and when he saw him, I just skipped a line. That would have made no sense. Verse 32. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by the other side. Verse 33. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him, and he bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and then he sat him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back." Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? He said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "You go and you do likewise." Let's just think about that story for a minute, and let's think about it in the same context in which we're living today, and kind of like maybe bridge it over for us, okay? When you think about the 2 guys, this is a very famous story. You probably have heard it and know it really well, but when you think about the priest and the Levite who both went by the man on the side of the road and passed by, I'm sure that they had much of the same cultural pull that we feel. Right? You could probably name some of those from the list, that they would feel like, I'm too busy to deal with this right now. That passivity that we feel at times where we're like, I can't deal with this right now. The conditionality where the priest and the Levite, I'm sure, had to think, right now, this man, I can do nothing to help, because how would that help me? I'm just guessing those were some of the pulls that they felt, and some of the things we would feel if we were in a very similar situation. And so Jesus gives us a hero in the story, a Samaritan man, which would have been completely surprising to everyone that was listening when Jesus tells this story. For Jesus to hold up a Samaritan man, we talked about this a little bit last week. We talked about the Samaritan woman at the well that Jesus meets, that the Samaritans were hated by the Jews. And here Jesus is saying, this group of people that you hate, he's crossed this very fragmented boundary that's a part of our world in life, and he's come and taken care of this man who's been beaten up. Jesus says, that's what it looks like to love our neighbor. Who was the man on the side of the road to the Samaritan but a stranger? We talked about last week, that hospitality, the word hospitality in those verses that we read earlier. When we went through those, each individual verse that you find in Hebrews and in 1 Peter and in Romans, when the word hospitality is used, it's the Greek word that means love for strangers. And who was this man but a stranger to him, and yet he loved him, so he is literally showing hospitality. What is hospitality but really just a very, I wouldn't say strict, but like a very open way of loving people. definitely a part of the way we love our neighbor is by showing hospitality. If we're going to follow Jesus' central command for our life to love God and then love others, it's going to be accomplished very frequently by hospitality, by loving people and even strangers, who Jesus shows and redefines in this parable as our neighbor. Now I want you to go back to verse 33, because why is it that the Samaritan man stopped when the priest and Levite did not? Why did he stop when the others didn't? And verse 33 gives us the answer. When he saw him, he had compassion. One of the books I've been reading during the series is a book called Stranger God. It's a very interesting book, and I think it's been helpful. And in the book, the author iterates over and over again that hospitality cannot be just a program for a church. The hospitality has to be a compassion in one's heart that grows and grows and grows through us deepening ourselves. I'm kind of adding this in. The way it's going to grow and grow is by us deepening in the gospel. Going back to last week, we talked about this idea that hospitality does not start with what we do for others, but what God has done for us. Hospitality is the gospel growing and rooting in our hearts and lives in a way in which we realize, man, when Jesus came for us, he was just like the Samaritan. In fact, somebody pointed this out once, and I always point it out every time I tell this story, because when you think about this Good Samaritan story, we're so often like ready to put ourselves into the Samaritan's shoes and say that we want to be the hero in the story just like him. We want to be that person. But to have a gospel lens on it is to understand that in that story, if we want to read ourselves into it, we're the man who's been beaten up on the side of the road. And Jesus is the Good Samaritan. And he comes and he bandages our wounds and he brings us back to life. And once we understand that, then we can go and then we can walk out what God has called us. Last week I gave some application. Really, the application is just the same again this week, that we have to believe the gospel. We have to receive the gospel. That Jesus doesn't just tolerate us, he welcomes us and loves us. And when we receive that his unmerited grace and favor and love is on us, when we receive that, then we can extend it. Then we can be like the Good Samaritan. And it starts, again, I'm going back to verse 33, it starts with compassion in our hearts. And so here's a prayer for us to pray, God, would you grow compassion in my heart? Would you grow compassion in my heart? When I pass by people every day, would you grow compassion in my heart to see them, God, differently than probably the way I'm seeing them, differently than the way the culture is pulling me to see them? Would you grow compassion in my heart? When we think about let's go back to that slide with the 7 pulls. There you go. 7 cultural pulls that we feel. Here's what's great about this, that the gospel has an answer to every one of these. When we apply the gospel, when we move into what Jesus has done for us, just think about how hospitality has an answer for all of these. And you can see it in the Good Samaritan story, that instead of being fragmented, we cross boundaries. Just like the Samaritan did here, moving across ethnic, cultural, and religious barriers to help a Jewish man. Just like Jesus did for us, and crossing every boundary imaginable to come and rescue us. We live in an individualistic society, and what hospitality shows us is that we must be connected, that we close the gap. We close this individualistic gap by looking out for others and going after them. We're no longer passive, but the gospel calls us to be sacrificial. I don't have time to tell the whole story, so I may come back to it again, but I really felt like this was something that God gave me. Jennifer and I were hiking a mountain. I told you that story if you were here a few weeks ago, about hiking a mountain in Greece. And while we're hiking up the mountain, Jennifer noticed right away, she's got a radar for these things, some guy who was using the word y'all. And we're in the middle of Greece, and so that's interesting to hear the word y'all in Greece. And so we end up like having a conversation, and he says, we were like, who are you, what's going on? And we shared a lot of his backstory, but eventually got to the fact that he had helped plant a church in Germany Now he was back in the States, and we were like sharing that exchange of being a part of a new church start. And it was just pretty fascinating to meet somebody on a mountain in Greece who was originally from Virginia, who had planted a church in Germany, and we're just kind of having a fun talk. And as we kind of were getting ready to leave, he said, "There's one thing I would leave you with in your church." He said, "You're not asking for this, but what I'm going to tell you is if you really hope to embrace all cultures and all peoples and cross boundaries and to be like what we're describing as a hospitable church," he says, "whatever level of uncomfortability that you feel right now, it needs to go up like by 10. I was like, "Oh man, that hurt." And then he like walked off and vanished. No, I'm kidding. Oh, that didn't happen. Story wasn't that epic, but I received that, and I think it was a good word for our church that we can have good intentions about, like, God, we want to be a church that, and fill in the blank of all the things we've declared we want our church to be, but until we're willing to get uncomfortable, we won't be that church. And the more uncomfortable we get, right, the more uncomfortable we get, the more comfortable it will be for those who are outsiders, for the stranger, for us to show hospitality. Listen, I'm just pause here for a second because we have so many new friends in the room who are like, I don't know how this hits you if you're just like coming in the room and this is your first or second time in our church. I hope it's encouraging to you. I hope you didn't walk in this room and didn't feel welcome. That would be quite ironic, and I wouldn't like that at all. None of us would. So don't let us like drop the ball on that before you leave, for us to get to know you a little bit and say hello. But I don't know. I feel like the Lord's led us to this place and this time and like this challenge as we go into this school year, for us to be willing to be the kind of church He's called us to be, and that will mean at times for us to move into what's pretty uncomfortable, to be sacrificial. In a world in which is conditional, God calls us to love and serve people unconditionally. The Samaritan man didn't ask for payment or expect a favor in return. His care was completely unconditional, rooted in mercy and not personal advantage. We live in a distracted culture. We just would move past so often needs and people in our lives. And here was this Samaritan man who was fully engaged, bandaging this man's wounds, pouring on oil and wine, personally placing him on his animal. We live in a busy world. The Samaritan man could have just been like the priest and the Levite and could have just kept going. But he stops and he says, look, I'm going to be available today. The gospel moves us to be available for people. And then when we think about a results-driven society and culture, I think just the gospel will call us to be present. I don't think the Samaritan man saw this man who had been robbed as an obstacle to his own productivity. He stayed through with him. He was present with him, even if there was no value in which he could immediately perceive from that situation. So this is what we're fighting against. Hospitality shows us this different way. It calls us to this different way. Now, if you're willing to kind of be on this journey with me, and you're like, okay, I hear you, Joel. I hear what you're trying to say. I hear the scripture you're trying to present, and I want to follow you here. I want to go with you. If you're willing, and you're like, all right, Lord, let me take kind of my next step when it comes to hospitality. Let us as a church take that next step. I'm open, I'm willing, I'm available, I'm ready. I feel it. Maybe some of you are like, I'm so busy. How would I ever have margin? That's huge. How would I ever have margin? You have to have margin in your time and in your money and mentally, emotionally. We have to find margin if we're going to be hospitable people. But if you're like, okay, I want to do that. I want to take that next step. If you make yourself available and you have this in your mind and your heart, it will come quick. That's my warning to you. That more than likely, you'll be presented with an opportunity today or tomorrow. And you will be thinking, will I be hospitable? Will I do what I just learned about and taught about and was taught to me? Or will I kind of just go with the flow? I read a bunch of books leading up to the series and preparing, and so I'm getting all in my mind and my heart. I'm looking at these passages, and I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to preach. I see it kind of coming together. And as I did that, guess what happens to me? God's like, okay, I'm going to give you some opportunity. I finished like a long study day one day, and I picked up my kids from school, or I can't remember. Somehow I had a couple of my kids with me, went into Kroger. We're in Kroger, and a guy says, man, I don't know. I feel like I was supposed to come up to you because I can't pay for my groceries today. I need some help. I'm going to pay for like half of them. I need help paying for the other half. And I was like, wow, I just spent like a whole day talking about hospitality, love for strangers. And like, can I say no right now? Is that even an option on the table? I don't think so. And so very simple gesture. I paid for this guy's groceries. I didn't go anywhere else from there. I didn't do anything else. This was not some big like story. I'm just saying when I made myself available, there was an opportunity to feel like, yes, I need to say yes to this. And then like the next day, there was another opportunity that came up. Somebody needed a place to stay. And I felt like I needed to say yes. And I think one of the keys for us when we practice hospitality will be for yes to be our first instinct, and not excuses. Because we live in this culture that's going to pull us in the opposite direction, we're going to immediately have excuses in our mind and our hearts why this won't work or why we shouldn't do it. And I think we need to be yes first. Now, it may not ultimately be a yes. It may be more wise for us to do something different or to think about it differently. But I think we need to start with yes. How do we love this person? How do we show care in this situation? Because that's what Jesus did for me, I want to do for others. One more story, because it's I don't know. It's cool how God does this. You're working on it, you're thinking about it, and then like God just puts it in your lap, right? There was a team of us that went to Central Asia this summer. On our way back from the trip, we had a great trip. On our way back, we're in Istanbul airport, and I turn around, and there's a guy standing behind me. And when I turn to him, I just feel like I'm supposed to introduce myself. So I say, "Hey, I'm Joel. How are you? Who are you?" And we talk, and I was asking him where he's from, and he was from Turkey, and he's flying back to the U.S. He's been living in the U.S. for the last year and a half, and he said, "Yeah, I've been living in the U.S., and now I'm moving to a new place." I said, "Where are you moving?" "I'm moving to a place called Athens, Georgia." And I said, "Great. I live there. That's awesome." And he said, "Yeah, I'm starting school at University of Georgia." I said, "That's so great. I know people there." And so we talked, and I said, "I'll give you my number." And Kai was there too, and Kai said, I'll give you my information, and he had lots of questions about what to do, and like once he got here, like he didn't know where he was going to live, and didn't have very many campus resources, so Kai passed a lot of those things along to him. Then I talked to him some more, and then I said, "Please text me when you get here." So he ends up doing that. Just this is all in real time, like right now, happening right as we speak. And he's cool enough that I think he'd be fine with me just sharing the story right now. And this past week, we got together with him. A couple of us did. I brought along a friend that spoke Turkish, and so that they could interchange a little bit. And we were just catching up, and we were asking how things were going. And he started telling us a story. He said, "I've worked in this restaurant, and in this restaurant, I worked with these Americans. And when we were in the restaurant and we were working, they acted like we were great friends. Just the way we would joke and talk and relate to each other. It was like we were such good friends. And then when we left the restaurant, we didn't hang out. I didn't understand it at all. And like as we were having the conversation, I don't think he still like didn't understand it. And we were trying to actually explain to him, we were like, yeah, that sounds like American culture. That like we can be friends with somebody in this scenario and just leave and just like totally disconnect. And in his culture, from where he was coming, that made no sense at all. Like if we're going to spend time together, we're not going to spend like an hour together. We'll spend a day together. It was that kind of feel. And he was talking about like, man, like that hurt. Like it was nice how honest he was in the situation. And he looked at us, he said, I know you guys aren't those kind of guys. Oh man, put the pressure on. I said, I hope not. And he said, like, man, I noticed, like, you guys really, there's something really different about you. And I was like, praise God. I hope so. I hope that the love of Jesus and the gospel of Jesus is so taken root in my heart and my life and the other guys I'm with that, like, it really is like a gospel difference he feels by interacting with us. But we also know, we walked away from that saying, man, we want to be this guy's friend and like a real friend. Have him into our home. Spend real time with him. Not because we're like, oh, we just hope he just becomes a Christian. If that doesn't work out, then we'll move on. No, because we're called to love him. And we think the best way to love him is to show the gospel to him and share that with him and pray for him to come to know Christ. But ultimately, like, we are to love him and show hospitality to him, and that's our goal. I think our church did a great job of this when we had a season where we had a homeless couple that was a part of our church, and we like the way that we met needs and took care of people there. That was really good. And God's going to keep, like, if we say, okay, we're willing to take this next step. If you say that individually and us corporately, God will keep giving us opportunities to take care of people like that. And when we do, like, we get to walk out the gospel in such a profound way that it's real. I think that if we don't do this, if we don't practice hospitality, there'll be a part of your Christian life that will stagnate, and you'll never be able to kind of like mature past a certain point. If you've ever felt like you've hit a little like ceiling in your Christian life, and you're like, it doesn't feel all that exciting, it doesn't feel like all that great right now, then one of the ways that you may be missing it is with this hospitality practice. Because I promise it'll be exciting. It'll be fun. And you'll see Jesus in it. Like we read in Matthew 25, you will meet Jesus there. Yui, you told me you was okay to share this. I was talking with Yui this week, and I was asking him, he comes from Nigeria, and in Nigeria I was asking, like, is the culture there like super hospitable? And he said, oh yeah, like totally, it's everywhere. And he said, one way I feel that is when I go to church, or if I miss a week of church, then I get like my phone blown up because I missed one Sunday of church. And I was like, man, I love that. Like that's like I think a little weird in our culture, right? But isn't that a good thing to bridge over and say we're going to love people and care about people enough that, like, if we don't see them one time, we're thinking of them, and so just one very practical step would, like, let's try it. Look around the room right now. If somebody's not here, send them a text. I missed you today. Wouldn't that be good? All right, so that's the application today. God, would you give me a heart of compassion? Would you let me take one more step forward when it comes to hospitality? I feel all the currents. I feel all the pull in our culture to, like, not do those things. I'm going to be like the priest and the Levite. I'm going to walk around, but I want to be like you, Jesus. I want to follow you into this, and I want to embrace this idea of hospitality that you've called me to do this. That's your application. Okay. Thank you for listening and for such a long message. I'm going to pray now that we could walk in this.